from Romans 12. Paul wrote to the church at Rome, and in the midst of his letter, shares these words, which have always been a part of one of my favorite verses. I appeal to you, therefore, brethren, that's the old version. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable, which is your spiritual worship to God. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. The word of God for the people of God this morning. Thank you. You may be seated. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to God, who is our rock and our Redeemer. Words that come from the last verse of Psalm 19, in case you ever wondered where does that verse come from, or that sentiment. One of my singers that I enjoy is Willie Nelson, a country singer. And I read a book about his life, and I cannot really say, go thou and live like him. But one day, he shares this event that happened in his life. A movie producer came to him and said, Willie, we need a song for a movie we're doing about being on the road. And Willie said, on the road again? Can't wait to get on the road again. Making music with my friends. I can't wait to get on the road again. He said it was the easiest song he ever wrote. The producer wasn't all that impressed initially with the fact that he just came up with a song like that. And Willie did say it took another 2 or 3 weeks to put the tune and the rest of the words together. But for him, it was the easiest song that he had ever written because it was how he was living. So it was simply words about his life. St. Augustine was asked, how do you express living the Christian life? He thought for a moment and said, love God and do as you please. A very simple expression, and one that I urge you to keep in mind and kind of hold on to, because if you're ever in a discussion group or with some friends and the conversation starts to lull and you have nothing to talk about, just throw that out. What do you think Augustine meant by that expression when he said, love God and do as you please? Start to take the layers off that and see where it leads among your friends. Now, if some of us were asked, how do you express the Christian life from your perspective? We might name one of the hymns, Trust and Obey. Mainly obey. It's all in the rules and the regulations and following the 10 Commandments and all of those things. In fact, for a person that I was reading again about, that was one of the things that he's remembered for. Eric Lindo was a Scottish runner that made the Olympics. The movie Chariots of Fire was made about this man. He made the Olympic team and then discovered that the event that he was running in, the 100-meter, was running on a Sunday. He went to the coach and said, I cannot run. Immediately there was reasoning, and it became a country debate across the land of Scotland of how he could still stay true to his religion and his beliefs and still run on the Olympic race. But as he listened to all of these about, well, you can go to church on Sunday, you can meditate, and you can run the race and then go back to observing the Sabbath however you want to. And he said, no, for me it has to be a whole day experience. And so in some ways, he's remembered for a man who stuck to the rules even though it might cost him. As we think about other hymns that come to mind as far as what's it mean to live the Christian life, one of the ones for me is the hymn we sang to start with, "Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithful. Morning by morning new mercies I see. Thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me." And as we went across this congregation today, there would be a number of hymns lifted up that you would say, that expresses the Christian faith to me. Now, one of the things that I started to do a while back was to face my mortality and realize that there's a fair chance I'm going to die someday. and not trusting my lovely wife as much as I should, I thought I probably ought to put the memorial service together so she has some ideas of what to do, because Lord forbid what she would do. But I want you to know that as I planned for my memorial service, I've got it narrowed down to 100 hymns now. So if you come to my memorial service, it's going to be a long one. Because through the years, so many of those hymns express my faith, have touched my life in a number of ways. And so I'm really hoping and praying the Lord gives me another 20 years to keep ciphering that list down, to get it down to 2 or 3 that's a little more presentable. But it's an interesting experiment for you to do and to share the word with your family members. That, one of the hymns that's really touched my life through the years is this hymn. And if it works out for you to have a part in the planning of my service, I would like that done either as a solo or as a congregational hymn. It's a good discipline to spend some time on. If we listen to what Paul might say about what's the essence of the Christian life, well, we've got lots of readings to go through because he spent some time putting down in print what was important for him. And the reading that Wynn read this morning about where he came from, and to him initially, that was important. Paul could look back on his pedigree and his background of being a good Jewish individual, and he could brag about that and list all the things that he had been through, all the things that he had done. But then he says, really, that's all for naught. Because what's really important is an experience and a relationship with Jesus Christ that can empower your life from then on, every day you live. I referred to Eric Lindo earlier. And the movie basically summed up his life to that extent, just around that first comment I made. But there's much more that makes this man a hero in Scotland. When Eric Lindo realized he couldn't run the 100-meter without breaking faith with his religion, he began to train for the 400-meter, which is a whole other ballgame. Because you have to pace yourself. You don't just run as fast as you can and cross the line. Here you have to figure out the distance and start pacing yourself, building more lung capacity. But he went about it, he made the team and qualified for the 400-meter. The day of the race, he took off like he was running the 100-meter. He was at the same pace. And all of those who were watching said, uh-oh, he's blowing the race. He'll never last that long. He ran the 100-meter, ran the 200-meter at record pace. And he said, I felt like God was empowering me. I have never had that feeling before. He ran the 300-meter, kept going. By then, he was way out in front. And he never faltered. He won the race, set an Olympic record at that time, and became the national hero that we know him of. And that's where the movie basically ends. But if you read more about his life, you find he went on speaking tour and spoke about his faith and how he made the choices he made in a lot of congregations. He felt called to become a missionary to China, a land that he grew up in, and returned there. Married, had a family. And often he and his family came back to England or Canada. And then war broke out between Japan and China. Some missionaries decided that no matter what, they would stay in China. They sent their families back home, and they continued to minister there. They were taken prisoner of war and put on in a camp. Very little to eat, very little to wear, and they made do as best they could. In the midst of that, there was an attempt to have a prisoner of war exchange. Because he was so well known, it was arranged that he would be released from camp in exchange for another prisoner. On the day of his exchange, he turned to a pregnant woman and said, "You take my place." He died in prison camp. That's the rest of the story. And if you'd like to read more about that, I've got a book that I like to recommend. I always try to come with a book report for you. Eric Metaxas is an author I've come to enjoy. He's written 7 men, and in this thin book, he covers 7 characters: George Washington, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, several others, and tries to tell in just a few pages a summary of their life. And Eric Lindos is one of those that he covered, and helps us to know a lot more about his life. So I'll leave that up there after church if any of you want to take a look at it. It belongs to the library. Don't take it home. Or return it if you do. But I recommend that. And so we have Paul saying, "I beseech you to change. Don't be conformed to the world around us. Be transformed and seek to become what Christ wants you to be." But I wonder what Christ would say if we asked Christ, what's the essence of the Christian life? Well, we have his words too, and one of them that he expresses so very well is love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. A statement that reminds me very much of what St. Augustine was trying to say when Augustine said, "Love God and do as you please." A statement that, as you take the layers off that, helps us understand what it might mean to love your spouse and do as you please. Love your children and do as you please. Love your parents and do as you please. Love your neighbor and do as you please. Jesus gave us these words that we might grow and become, but he did not leave us without some empowerment. And I appreciate the image that Christ gives us of the Last Supper. And one of the things I need to keep reminding myself is that it's not just on our power that we become what Christ wants, but Christ literally empowers us. And one of the main ways this happens, I think, is through the sacrament of communion. Now, when Jesus took the sacrament, they gathered in a room, took 2 or 3 hours of sharing together, and then shared the sacrament. And we've shortchanged it down to a quick 5 minutes, come and receive, and it's a drive-through, which loses so very much of what Christ wanted us to feel here. Then I got to thinking about those very special moments that I've experienced in life have been when my wife and I get invited over to a friend's home with 3 or 4 other couples or individuals, or they come to our home. We break food together, share fellowship, and then somewhere along the line in that evening, when we're feeling so close, the hostess will say, "Well, why don't we move into the living room to more comfortable chairs?" And I want to scream, "No, don't anybody move." I don't want to lose this moment, because it always seems whenever we move to more comfortable chairs, we never regain that moment of just eyeball to eyeball with everybody. Or the women move to one room, the men move to another. The continuity's broken. And that's one of the reasons I encourage my wife, let's have comfortable dining chairs. Then we can just sit there all evening and no one has to get uncomfortable. But it's that sentiment that I think we need to try to gather around this table. And so when I walk in and see that communion is going to be served, I try to take that whole hour of centering and becoming prepared and really being sensitive to the prayers and the hymns, the scriptures, and the centering in of what's going to happen here. So that when I come to the part of receiving, I truly am open and receptive to what God has to offer. And when I leave the table, maybe I can sense a little more fully what St. Augustine meant when he said, love God and do as you please. Because if we truly love God here, we can go forth to truly please God in all that we do. Sacrament liturgy is on page 12. Let's turn and follow along, shall we?